to Facebook Live. Lindsay Price here. I am so thrilled that I get to not have a conversation with myself. I get to have a conversation with another lovely human being, Krista Boehnert. Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I am awesome. So first of all, tell everybody where in the world you are situated right now.
I am in Victoria, BC at the moment. It's lovely and sunny here.
It's dark and not sunny here, but that's quite all right. That's right. You're on the far left of Canada. I am in the right-esque side of Canada, and so first of all, Krista is a playwright, and she has two lovely plays in our catalog, puzzle pieces, and Have You Heard? And the awesome thing about them is that they're monologue-based plays, and I put the description in the link so that you can go and check them out. But our topic today is motivating reluctant writers. Krista, how often do you have to deal with motivating reluctant writers?
Fairly frequently, actually. Not so much in the classroom. I working with folks just within my regular workday, but quite often I find the topic of writing, people are hugely intimidated by it. So they're usually very reluctant, and it's quite a fearful thing for them.
Why do you suppose that is? Because I find the exact same thing, and it's amazing to me, even within the theater world, of the theater people that I talk to, writing terrifies them. And I've had a talk of many drama teachers who say, yep, I had a high school teacher who told me I was terrible, and I put that play in a drawer, and I've never looked at it since, and I've never wanted to. And I go into classes, and it's filled with kids who are terrified of writing. Why do you think that is?
I think there's a couple of things. I think specifically with scripts, it's hugely intimidating. For a lot of people, just because they don't encounter it. So a lot of times at school, you're asked to write a poem or a short story or an essay, but the whole script format is an entirely kind of different beast for them. So I think just that new way of thinking is a bit different. And then I think subject matter. I think, you feel exposed sometimes when you're creating any form of art, and writing is no different. So I think there's a little bit of that, vulnerability around it, that people might be a little bit afraid to put something forward that, they're in a learning process. It might not be polished yet. What will people think? How will they react? So that kind of thing, I think, makes it scary for folks to tackle a little bit.
It's one of the things that I say. I think that every student, for exactly the reasons that you put forth, it's one of the reasons that every student should write a play, because it is a little bit vulnerable. And it is such a great way to put whatever's going on inside of them into another character, into someone who isn't them maybe, and just make it, get those, so many things, the thoughts that happen in their brains sort of just out into, out of them, which I think is all that they need. And I think you bring another interesting point too, is that the kids have been writing stories since they write stories or hear stories since before they go to kindergarten. Ooh. To write a play is something that doesn't quite get introduced with the same frequency in the same way.
That's so true. And it's interesting because once you hit high school, you start tackling Shakespeare in English class, but it's looked at more as a piece of literature rather than from that theatrical perspective. So I think a lot of times there isn't talk around, how scenes are structured and dialogue and all those things that come into play when you are working on a script. It's handled in a much different way. So even when they are encountering it, it's discussed in a bit of a different manner than as a script or as a piece that you would perform.
Yeah, nothing says fun like sitting and reading Shakespeare.
Right.
I love Shakespeare, and that's No. Okay, so let's talk about some strategies to help motivate our reluctant writers. So I think that's the first thing to acknowledge, is that if you may be one, if you're in the classroom, and that's okay, just acknowledge it. Which might not be a bad thing to do in your classroom, right? Like just to walk to the front of your classroom and say, my name is, I am a reluctant writer. Just so that students know that they're not alone, or they're in the same boat, and to just sort of go, look, everybody, we're all on the same page, right? And that's the starting point. What's a good second step?
I think one of the things that could probably work really well is just giving something tangible, like a tangible concept. So every day, everyone writes little scripts all day long on text on their smartphones. And I think giving students that kind of jumping off point might give them, some inspiration that they can tackle something. They can look at, a recent back and forth with a friend of theirs and say, okay, can I turn this into some kind of, short scene? So presenting them with something that they may already be quite good at, text, and see if they can massage it and change it a little bit so that it could be something that could be performed into a script. I think that might be a little bit of a good entry point for them.
Small steps. Krista, yeah. I have just been informed, because my biggest flaw as a human being is I mispronounce people's names. And apparently it's Krista Boehnert. It's not Krista Boehnert. So I have been chastised, and now I apologize. And I only call you Krista. I don't call you Krista Boehnert. I just call you Krista.
Exactly. I was going to say, I usually just go by the first names. It's all good.
All right, now we can move on. And my flaw has been exposed to the world. Oh my God, there's so many people. I just say their name wrong all the time, and my name is Lindsay, and I say people's name wrong. People's names wrong all the time.
I do too.
I should write a play about it. Okay, so now we'll go back. Now, what you were talking about, the notion of small, I think that's key, right? Like, we don't want them to be writing opuses.
No.
A, no one wants to read them. And B,
you don't want to scare them off. You just want baby steps. You don't start swimming laps right away when you get into the pool. The first thing they do is ask you to put your face in the water and blow bubbles, which is actually very terrifying if you've never done it before. So just getting comfortable with that first little introduction. So just, I think a short scene work or a short monologue. At some point I was going to say the word monologue because they're my favorite thing on earth.
Oh, good. We'll talk about monologues in a second. So, yes. One thing I like to suggest too is to teachers is, if you want to do a playwriting unit, you need to be a little proactive. And the month before you start this unit, you have them come in, and there's like some kind of 5-minute bell work thing, like write down the last conversation that you heard in the hallway, or finish this thought. I firmly believe that. Write for 5 minutes. Or you're sitting in a doctor's office, and you overhear one side of a phone conversation, write the other half of the phone conversation, so that it's teeny tiny little things. You don't even say it's playwriting, right? It's just the thought of coming in. It's habit, right? Every day you come in, and for 5 minutes you write something, so that when you start to introduce the unit, there's not as much pushback, because they've already been doing it.
Very true. Yeah, then their comfort level is there. They feel a little more confident to experiment a bit when you've had the chance to just form that habit and be able to explore in different ways. Then when you introduce the concept of playwriting, they're like, okay, I can play around a bit. I played in the sandbox. Now I'm going to try, do X, Y, Z.
We'll extend the metaphor. So they've played in the sand, and now it's like, okay, here's a pail. Now make a sandcastle, maybe a little one,
just a baby one,
just a baby one, and then we build up on that. Absolutely, small steps. I think are, if you have one takeaway from this little conversation, it's that you want to start small. And as Krista said, just the notion of like a half-page monologue, and the kind of scenes that I usually suggest, which I have taken. I was in a workshop with the great youth playwright Stephen Gregg, and he talked about the 10-line scene, right? So you got 2 characters, 1 location, 10 lines.
Perfect.
You know, and it's the foundation.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, that's true. And it's, when you can do something small like that, just a tangible little piece, whether it's a, reaction to a mark on a test, or just a very short, quick piece that, no longer than what you post on Facebook, really, in some respects, that's something that they can really grasp and play around with.
Well, and then you can start to think about, having them. And the other thing I think, which is really good when we're talking small steps, is giving them something to respond to, so that you're not saying to them, here's a blank page, come back to me in 20 minutes and fill it with wonder. No, but that it's, here's a picture, which I think is really important for our visual learners today. Here's a picture, either of a location or something's happening, and just write the inner thought of the person in the photo, the person taking the photo, what's happening just outside the photo, and just giving them the first line of a scene and saying, okay, here's the first line of your scene. What comes next?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I think it's a really good track to, or, if this happens, then what? Those kind of let's pretend types of questions that gives them a chance to respond and to come up with some different scenarios. I think one of the things is there's always going to be a couple students in the class that, imagination might not be their strong suit. The idea of coming up with plots or responding to things might be a bit tricky for them. And I think one that, it's a bit of a universal tactic that will work for the imaginative students and the ones that, really struggle with writing, is to, tell a family story. Everyone has, that story about, the time Uncle so-and-so dropped the turkey at Christmas dinner, or everyone sort of has those family lore type things about something that a sibling did. And I think maybe that way they don't have to, do a big plot arc. They know that story inside out and backwards, and just maybe dramatizing something they're quite familiar with might also be a good, step as you're building. It's a little bit more further down the line from that introductory piece, but I think it might be another building block that you can add on once they feel comfortable doing some small pieces.
All doorways, right? And I have found, when I'm getting them to create or come up with, I like to say gather ideas rather than create ideas, because create is another word that seems to send people into a tizzy. When the definition of creativity is just do something different, right?
Right.
So you can be a creative scientist, you can be a creative room organizer, you can be, there's lots of, the arts are not the only place where creativity, we don't have the domain.
No.
So what's that?
I said, which is a good thing. It takes innovation from everywhere to make us look at things in different ways.
Exactly. So one of the things that I like to use sentence starters in terms of, like, here's your topic. Okay, now here's 4 sentence starters, which I wonder, what if only, why does, and then so here's your topic, here's your sentence starters. Finish the sentences based on your topic, and that is amazing what every student at every level, at every skill set, can come up with something. It's it is in everybody. It's just the matter of, those reluctant writers, there's a reason they're reluctant a lot of times.
Well, and I think one of the things you brought up, at the beginning of our chat was that comment about, I wrote a play once and my teacher said it wasn't great and I, chucked it under a door. And I think that's a really important thing when you are delving into writing, especially with reluctant writers, that it needs to be a safe place to be vulnerable and to experiment and try out new things, and just having those sort of ground rules, laid as part of the framework that, we're going to explore and we're going to react to things, and some stuff's going to work and some stuff's not. It's a bit of an experiment, and that it's kind of like the brainstorming rules. All ideas are good ideas, and let's just see where we go.
Well, I know a teacher, when he does a monologue unit, is he writes a monologue with them.
Oh, that's perfect. That's absolutely perfect.
Yeah, he's putting himself out there as well to show that he's willing to do that. And it's that you hit it right on the head. It's a safe place. And yes. How do we make it a safe place to write? And because there's all the stories that I've been told, like the kid who got a failing mark on his play because he didn't write it with proper grammar. And it's like, because we don't talk with proper grammar. There's
right.
Or the, just like they put themselves out there and they get told that it's not dramatic enough, or, without having it's people who are critiquing without the proper foundation themselves in what it needs. And sometimes they're not comfortable writers either. And that's why they're not sure where to start, but.
Right. And I think it is a tricky situation for the educator. How do you give feedback, and how do you keep it safe while also trying to develop the skills, and maybe, put a few challenges in front of a student as they're learning a new skill. So it's a very tricky dance, I would say, because it is so personal a lot of the times, some of the pieces that the students will write. And so just walking that line between, being supportive and coming up with some suggestions and constructive feedback, it's always a bit tricky.
Do you have any guidelines that you use to do that in terms of giving feedback? Like, how do you set up that scenario?
It's funny actually, because you've done it with me with my writing, and I very much appreciated it. It's always comes from a place of, I really like this. Have you thought about, what might happen if this character was, a little more upset about what's happening in the scene? Or have you thought about, kind of posing questions, probing questions, rather than saying, you should change this part. It doesn't make any sense. It's coming from a place of, have you thought about, or what do you think would happen if, and just opening those different avenues for the writer to think, okay, yeah, that is it would be great to add a little more tension there. Or generally speaking, ask questions that give them the chance to kind of contemplate and explore some different options. It's usually how I approach it. And then I find often you kind of get in a conversation, they have time to think about it, and then you get in a bit of a conversation back and forth on, okay, well, we could try this, or we could try this. And it's more of a bit of a collaborative experience than sending them off and away on their own to deal with it. I
really like that notion of this is a collaborative experience. Mm-hmm. What a great framework for helping someone improve their play, especially if they're a reluctant writer. Because if they're a reluctant writer, if you say to them, go make this better, they're going to be like, well, I got to the end, I'm done. That's it. I don't know what to do. Why would they know how to rewrite? Like, why would they? It's because you don't get an essay back saying, okay, rework this piece. Generally speaking, it's more like grammars. Or can you work the conflict in the second paragraph just a little more?
Exactly. So yeah, the rewriting definitely, and that feedback loop is something that's also unique, I think, about playwriting and script writing that students won't have encountered before. So as much as you can keep it that collaborative. The other good thing about it, when you come from a place of questions, often I'll find that, if I miss something, if I think a character's, upset with somebody else in a dialogue scene, and they're like, oh, that's actually not what I intended at all, it gives the writer the opportunity to look at it and say, okay, so that, the reaction I got wasn't quite what I was expecting. Let's talk about how we can tweak that. So there's that opportunity as well for them to get that reader reaction. So that's helpful.
Yeah, I like to, you go positive, question, positive, so that lovely that feedback sandwich, which I know lots of people talk about, But I'm going to hit that again. Make feedback collaborative. I think that's the second thing that you should take away from this conversation. So the first is small steps. Whatever you're doing with your students, whatever you're doing with your own writing, take very tiny, small steps. And the habit and consistency is better than volume.
Absolutely.
And second, make feedback collaborative. That is the tone, and that also helps with if you are doing the type of feedback where you're getting peer feedback, where you have other students who are also offering their opinion. Keep it collaborative so that that means everyone is working towards the same goal.
Absolutely. And everyone's also invested. Everyone really wants everyone else's project to be the best that it can be. So the ideas that flow are incredible. If you can keep that collaborative process, that is key.
And it takes practice. That's the other thing I would suggest too, is that good constructive feedback takes practice. So have your students practice on outside material, bring in monologues, we got free ones on the Theater Folk website. Just take them and rip them to shreds. It's fine. I'll never know. Take them and have them practice giving constructive feedback on outside material so that the first time that they give feedback is not on a peer's work.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a great suggestion. That makes a huge difference because there's a confidence level that comes with giving feedback as well. And I think initially when you're first tasked with giving feedback to someone, your initially go-to place is always to focus on improvements and things you can fix. People, I think, don't naturally necessarily go for, oh, it was great. You kind of get the other super bland feedback, which everything was fabulous and I wouldn't change anything because they don't want it to, hurt your feelings. Or it's so
it was great.
Yeah. It's just so eviscerating. You don't want to deal with it. So feedback absolutely is a practice thing. And so being able to practice on found material. So by the time they are chatting with each other is a really good strategy for sure.
So we've talked a little bit about, in terms of gathering ideas, using family stories. I like to use prompts and just things to get them started. How else do you initiate pushing the reluctant writer when they're saying, I don't know what to write about, all my ideas suck? How do you push them? Gently nudge.
Yes, exactly. Gently nudge. I think, and this is going to be me getting on my monologue soapbox, but I think everyone kind of naturally can respond to sort of that Dear Diary concept, so getting them to respond to something on a personal level and write a short monologue piece. If they feel very uncomfortable with a personal story or a personal prompt, you can always take something that's found, a very well-known, like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, not a spectacular example, so that's coming to mind, and get them to write, maybe a monologue of what Goldilocks is thinking when the bears, walk in and see her, and being able to write a diary entry. I think those are fairly skills that they learn as students experience quite early on. There's always the What I Did on My Summer Vacation essay, which can be somewhat similar. So I think there's a little bit of foundation already existing to try doing a short monologue that would be pretty familiar to a lot of folks.
And I'm going to yes and that. So if you want to take something like What I Did on My Summer Vacation and you really want them to focus on a monologue, then there has to be a listener. And
yes.
So who's the listener in the story of What I Did on My Summer Vacation? And two, what's the emotional presence of the listener? I.e., are they in love with the speaker? Do they dislike the speaker? Do they disbelieve the speaker? So the speaker has to have the story of what I did on my summer vacation, and he has to be trying to convince the listener. Is the listener got their back turned to them for some reason, and the speaker's trying to get them to turn around? Is the speaker trying to hurt the listener with their story of summer vacation, so that the listener is trying to have a stern face? So all of a sudden you have this story which students have been having to tell in classrooms for every year since probably kindergarten, and all of a sudden you've got monologue tendencies without even trying that hard.
Absolutely, yeah. They're thinking in a totally different way, in that theatrical way, and having the listener and the audience for it. Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I love that.
Well, listeners and audiences, I think, is the thing that writers, young writers, actually every writer, reluctant or not, is the thing that sometimes gets missed. And when they go down a road and they find their writing, they say, oh, my writing's boring, or I can't figure out what to do with it. It's like, well, who are you communicating to? So we have collaboration. Now we're going to talk communication. Like, who are these characters? What do they want to say? And why do they want to say it? And what do you want your audience to get out of this experience? You have to think of the audience. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's the great thing about, well, film as well, but live theater in particular. It's that exchange with the characters and the audience, and just their experience. Do you tie everything up in a neat, tidy bow for the audience, and there's no questions left? Is it participatory? Are there moments where the audience can interact? So yeah, there's definitely a huge amount of communication between the characters and the audience members. Do you break that fourth wall and all of a sudden just have your characters address the audience full on? And if you do, then are they reliable there? Are they reporting things exactly as they're occurring, or are they trying to woo the audience, to their side of whatever's going on with the rest of the storyline? So yeah, it's always almost another character that you should always be keeping in mind as you're doing your playwriting.
Absolutely. That's a great way to think of the audience as another character. When you were talking, I was just brought to mind that there's a play of mine where a character says one thing during a scene conversation, and then in a monologue reveals the exact opposite. And I've had kids who are working on the play, they write me and say, she says this, but then she says this. And I'm like, yeah, she's lying. And they're like, what? You can do that? It's like, yes, you not only can you should. And I think that's another great thing to get a reluctant writer to do, is write a monologue where a character is a liar. Make them a bad liar, make them a good liar. Like, just because that's fun.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah, it's absolutely fun. Everyone can embrace that one, I think. Wholeheartedly, they could dive into it.
I think so. I hope so. It's so funny because I say something like that would be fun, and I'm like, well, that's because I like writing. Everything about writing is
wonder, right? Yeah.
So I guess as we're sort of wrapping up here, so what is some let's leave on some nice pieces of advice for those who are dealing with multiple, maybe reluctant writers. How do we what's a nice piece of advice to sort of to end on to break that barrier? Well, maybe we've already talked about it, but
there's so many.
There's so many. Good. All right. 20. I got a light. I'll just sit here. You just go.
I do think the baby steps one, I think absolutely is key, because I think that's the one that scares people off most. But I think perhaps just because when you're faced with a bunch of reluctant writers and you don't exactly know what their reluctance is coming from, and it's probably coming from different places, if you can provide some options, I think is great. So something like, someone who's very visual will probably respond to having the photo and writing a scene around the photo, whereas someone who's really analytical, they might just want to do something, either an adaptation of a story that they already know all the plot to, or so if you can give some options. It gets complicated, I think, when you try to do too much. So I think the best strategy might be to pick a theme, say it's like robots, for example, and you could have an image of a robot. You could have an opening line saying robots, oh my God, the robots are here. So you could have things that are all at least tied together, so you're not trying to be all things to all people. But I think if there's a couple entry points that you can provide access for reluctant writers and give them a little bit of say in how they tackle their reluctance, that might be a strategy to try to play around with.
You are blowing my mind, because I think that is an excellent idea. So let's say you've got like jealousy. So, because jealousy is it's my go-to theme. So if you could find a picture, and if you had like 4 things, right? So one's a picture, one's a first line, one's maybe like an abstract image, like the whole notion of the green-eyed monster, and then one is something tactile, like, you know, something that they could touch.
Yes.
And you've got all of the different kinetic-y thingies, all the different levels of how people respond, because it's all doorways. I think that's what we're
yeah. That's true. Definitely doorways. And people draw inspiration from different places. So yeah, having 4 sort of different doorways, it's going to appeal to I think the broad section of the class, but they all will pick their own doorway that works for them. Yeah,
because the doorway is not the work, right?
No.
Nor are you doing the work for them if you give them a doorway. The product is the work, right? The monologue that's completed based on a set of criteria. That way, you know, if there's a criteria, then you have something to assess, right? So it has to have one character speaking to a listener with the beginning, middle, and end, and an emotional and a change from emotion from one to another. These are things that because we're not building great playwrights, we're building communicators.
Right.
So, you know, it's the unseen. That's the thing that can be assessed. So the doorway is just the thing to get them putting pen to paper or fingers to phones, whatever.
Absolutely.
Whatever they're doing these days.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
That's great. All right. That's this is lovely. I'm really thrilled that we had this opportunity to sit down and do this. You and the sun. Actually, it's really quite funny because like I'm in the reds and the blacks, and you got the nice white ceiling in the sun. And I want to reiterate that Krista has 2 awesome monologue-based plays, which are fabulous classroom analytical pieces, as well as wonderful competition pieces for small casts, Have You Heard, and puzzle pieces, and their links are in the description wherever they are. They're on my side, but I don't know where they are for you. And thank you very much, all of you out there in Facebook Land, and thank you, Krista.
Thank you. It was lots of fun.
Awesome. Everybody, have a great night.
Take care.